Hello once again. I am Mike Westendorf, the host of Great Questions, Great Conversations, a podcast here at St. Paul's in the Bridge in Muskego, Wisconsin, where we're talking any number of different topics from a Christian perspective, but we're really trying to have an authentic conversation. And this time we're going to do part two. I mentioned last time that we just had so much time, good time talking in depth about a number of different topics with Staff Minister Brandon Steenbock, particularly around the idea of marriages and families and the need for skills. A lot of times we assume that people know how to do something, and it turns out that they don't. And a big part of it is because nobody actually ever taught them. One of my kids will oftentimes remind me, could you show me how to do this? And there's a part of me that goes, well, what do you mean you haven't picked this up by just watching me? Well, it turns out that a lot of stuff doesn't get learned that way. And Brandon, marriage stuff also has a tendency to, it just doesn't get picked up. Or if it wasn't modeled well for you, you might never have seen it. And if it was modeled for you, but nobody actually, helped you take ownership of it, then you still don't know what you're doing. And so where we left off last time was talking about some skills that are really important from your perspective as a family minister in particular. And we talked last time in depth about the idea of skill number one, repair. And if you could just give us a quick flyby for those who maybe didn't hear the first one, and if you missed the first conversation, please go back and listen to it, especially if your marriage is struggling in a place where forgiveness is really hard. You really want to listen to last week's podcast. But give us a flyby of number one, and then let's just dive into number two and number three.
Yeah. So skill number one that we talked about was forgiveness or repair. And that's when the hurt comes, the person who did the hurting, has to be willing to, first of all, acknowledge the hurt that they've caused. Second, they need to actually make a commitment to how they're going to change and communicate that. They need to ask for forgiveness, not I'm sorry, but please forgive me. And they need to actually let go of it themselves. And then the person who's been hurt needs to acknowledge their own hurt, right? Actually, the power of saying, yeah, what you did actually did hurt me. And I really, and then number two is to say, don't, I would expect better treatment. I don't want that to happen again. Please don't do that to me again. Yeah. And then number three, though, is to say the words, I forgive you. Don't just say, I'm sorry. Or don't just, don't say it's okay or whatever, but say, I forgive you. And then step four, right, is to let it go, bury it in the sea, let it be in the past, move past it. Don't treat the person as their sins deserve. So as we talked about last time, that's for those hurts that, don't change the safety or the necessarily the big trust commitment of the relationship. If there are major trust issues, betrayal, infidelity, addiction, abuse, those sort of things, that's a bigger process. And I hope you go back and listen to the last podcast and talk about what did that look like for your own life and your own marriage if you're struggling with that situation. But so that's a kind of an overview of the first skill we talked about.
Yeah, repair. So that's really the process of forgiveness and repentance and forgiveness from a Christian perspective.
Yeah.
Okay. So on to our second skill. And we mentioned this too, by the way, in the last one, that this is not just, oh, it's so cute, you just got married, so here's three things that you need to know. No, there are people who've been married for 30 years and who don't know how to forgive. And this is really good for us. Some of these skills that you're going to talk about, some of us might be doing a little bit better than others, but promise you that these are things that really all of us who are working toward or would like to have a functioning marriage, hopefully built on the foundation of Christ. And if that's not you, we're praying for you. Let us know. We would love to talk to you a little bit more about why Jesus matters as the foundation for, especially that first one, repair. But number two, in your opinion, from your position as a family staff minister, what's the next skill?
Yeah, it's going to sound simple at first, but it's actually quite profound. Take a walk. As a couple, make it a habit where you go for a walk together. Now, here's why this is really important and powerful. The thing is that number one, we often don't have the space where we can feel like we can just have the conversation we need to have. Right? If we're sitting in the house, it can feel a little closed in. It can feel like I can't get away from something. If there are kids around, we feel like we can't talk about it in front of the kids.
Right.
You know, if I'm at work, you're at work, we're just texting back and forth. We're probably not communicating very well. But the beauty of a walk is that you have this kind of like you're out in the open and there's not really anybody who's going to be listening to what you have to say. Like you may think that there are people, but there's nobody's going to hear what you have to say. Right. And most of the time, like my wife and I walk around our neighborhoods, we have like the one lady who walks her dog that we, like asked her name because we walk by her every single day.
Yeah.
Uh, and all we know about her is what her name is and what her dog's name is. But we say hi to her every single day. But that's like the one person we walk past. Everything else, we just there's just nobody else, right? So we get to talk about the hard things and we can talk openly about things. Um, One of the other reasons, though, this is really important is because of the way that men and women operate when it comes to sharing about hard things. So men, and I'm speaking stereotypically, but
Yep.
stereotypes are there for a reason. They tend to be true from just what we've observed. And actually, this one is based not just on typical cultural behavior, but actually they've done enough studies with infants to prove this is pretty hardwired in us. So what happens with men is that when they're engaged in a tough conversation, their cortisol levels rise, and they feel very strongly the all of the shame, the embarrassment of whatever they haven't done well.
Hmm.
And so, if there's a hard conversation to be had, and the wife is saying, "Hey, here's what I'm afraid of," or "Here's what you did that bothered me," um, she's trying to share these things, and he's going to feel like he needs to escape. Well, if you're out on a walk together, he actually has this kind of like he can sort of turn his face away a little bit. He can sort of focus on the sidewalk in front of him or whatever. And it gives him space to kind of, and there's also positive endorphins that are running through his system. So he's feeling a little bit more genuine and open. And so it allows him the space to actually think about what she's saying. Now, on the flip side, is that for women, stereotypically, uh, when they feel like their biggest fear or their biggest fear would be disconnection. And so they desperately want to be able to connect. And what's interesting that you see this happen, like if a woman is afraid of something and she shares her fear with her female friend, what happens? Her female friend leans in, opens up, grabs her, there's a hug, there's an embracing, right? There's a connection that's formed. So for a woman's instinctive behavior is be vulnerable, share my fear, and other women will connect with me. And
Yeah.
so she does that. When she does that with her husband, though, her fears often are tangled up with things about him because she's afraid of being disconnected from him. And a great example would be she asks him to take out the garbage and he doesn't do it. And he regularly doesn't do it. And every time she asks him to take out the garbage, he forgets. She gets on his case about it because she's afraid that he's not listening, that he doesn't care about what she needs,
Hmm.
that he somewhere deep down he's just living his selfish life and not interested in the things that matter to her. And even this stupid little detail of a garbage bag matters to her because it's part of what makes her house feel comfortable or not comfortable.
Hmm.
And so by expressing that to him, she's really exposing a fear. She's saying, "I'm afraid that if you won't take out the garbage for me, then maybe you don't care at all about me. Or maybe you're just never listening to me." Right. And so what happens then is that triggers his shame response. I failed. I always fail. I can't do this right. I can't make her happy. I'm no good. And so he wants to run away. Well,
Hmm.
if he runs away, what's going to happen? More disconnection fear for her because he's running away. That's
Right.
what she's afraid of. That's what she was always afraid of, is that he was going to run away from her. And so, how do you create an environment where he can lean in and she can connect and they can both do this in a way that feels comfortable for them? And a walk is a perfect place to do it. Now, if you're young and you don't have kids at home, it should be fairly easy to make this work, right? You just got married, you're 6 months in, you're living the high life, but now things have gotten real. You know, 6 months in, oh, this isn't all rose petals and sugar plums and all that. It's not that you necessarily thought that it would be, but
Right.
it's not perfect. And you're saying, what can we do? Go for a walk, make it a priority. But what if you have kids at home? What if you got little children that you can't just leave them alone? So my wife and I, when our kids were young, we would bundle up our youngest in the stroller. We would bundle him up with everything. We'd put him in the stroller. We'd cover him up with all the blankets, and we'd just walk. And if it was cold, he was fine. He was totally cozy and covered up. And what actually was really fun was the fact that all that fresh air for him made him sleep way better than so you're gonna
Yep.
get more sleep that way.
Yeah.
But as they got a little bit older, we just started doing this where we'd put on a show that they like to watch 20 minutes and we just go around the block.
Yeah.
And I mean, were we out of sight of the house for a minute at a time? Yeah. But were we afraid that the boys would be, we were going to come back and the boys were going to be playing with knives or something like that? No, because we knew that the show that they watch is the kind that they just zombie into. They just eyes glaze over, right? And if you're a parent, the show that your kids will not move
Yes.
for an hour if you put it on, right? So that's what we would do. And it was fine. And people will be like, oh, I don't want the screen to babysit my kids. Here's the deal. If your marriage is helped by letting a screen babysit your kids for 20 minutes a day, the negative impact of the screen babysitting them is so much less than the positive impact of your marriage being strong. Or to put it a different way, if your marriage is struggling, and you're devoted to no screen time for the kids, but your marriage is struggling, that's going to be worse for your kids long term. So go ahead, just do it. And then as your kids get older, like it just gets easier. Like my wife and I started doing this when our boys were little. We still go for walks all the time. It's
Yeah.
just a regular thing. I get home from work and I say, "Hey, you want to go for a walk right away, or should I take off my shoes?" You know, and we just go. And it's some of the best conversations that we have happen while we're out on a walk.
Hmm. Yeah, I didn't realize
But
that
understanding
was.
that dynamic.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'd never put those things together before and hadn't quite heard that. Yeah, the cortisol. If we're going to have a hard conversation, like you said, it doesn't have to be. Um, hey, Mike, you're always doing these things and it's just driving me crazy. It could be just be, hey, I'm afraid of this about our kid, or this, can we afford blah blah blah? Because immediately you express that fear, and at least for the way I'm wired, I have to really reel in the savior thing. All right, listen, but I can listen better if I'm going on a walk. Like you said, my legs are moving, my mind is moving. I can focus in different spaces and still be present. It's easier to be present. It's interesting because Melissa and I do the same thing. We go on walks quite a bit,
Yeah.
so that's cool. All right, so
Well, and
so
it's good for you health wise too. Like, I mean,
yeah,
you're just there's just it's a
yeah,
win-win. It's a win-win all around, right?
right, right.
So, and your kids love it because they get to watch a show.
Right, right. Which we're going to come back to, by the way. We're going to talk about screens in a little bit, but this is
Yeah,
the
yeah,
positive
yeah,
thing on screens. All right,
right.
so repair, take a walk. What would be your number three skill that maybe we need to learn as married
Yeah.
people?
So there's a concept called your relationship map. Your relationship map is all of those things that tell you how to navigate who each other are, right? And it's stuff like I know that my wife, that her favorite color is purple, which means that if I'm going to buy her something and I have to choose a color for it, purple is the way to go, right? I know that she doesn't really like flowers because she tends to kill them. Um, and so she says, just don't buy me flowers. But I know that if I buy a board game and I sit down and say, hey, I just bought this board game, what I would have spent on flowers, I spent on a board game. Let's sit down and play it together. And especially if the board game is super cute, because she likes cute things, to her, that speaks absolute love because she is a quality time person. Her love language is quality time.
Yeah.
So a board game says, I'm going to spend time with you, right? So it's those likes and dislikes as part of it. Um, on the other side, it's memories. It's, hey, do you remember the time that we did this? Hey, do you remember how it felt when we got to do this one thing? It's going back and looking at the pictures from the anniversary trip you took. It's talking about the time that your child said the just most adorable thing, and you both just burst out laughing together. It's about remembering that moment up on a mountaintop that you never took a picture of because you just both were like, we don't want a picture of this. It's got to burn in our memories instead. All of the positive memories of times that shaped you as a couple, those are part of that relationship map.
Hmm.
Uh, and it's also the dreaming forward. Like what are our hopes and dreams for the future? Where are we going? What are the things that both of us would love to do someday? Can we sit down and actually just ask each other the question? If there's one country you want to visit together, which one is it? Or two or three, Um,
Yeah.
let's dream about how to make that happen. And what do we think we're going to look like as a couple when our kids are out of the house?
Yep.
How are we going to stay connected? So all of that dreaming together, and it creates what. And my wife hates it when I use this term because it sounds weird, but it's a term that Gottman uses: the we-ness of our relationship. So yeah, it's just don't say it fast. But it's that we are a unit. We're a we. It's not you and me. It's we, right?
Hmm.
So developing the skill of making that happen, and in your day to day life, you can actually do this really easily. And the easy way to do it is to make sure that you are intentional about asking or giving a compliment to your spouse every day about something that you really appreciated about.
Hmm.
Hey, you know, I really love that you do this, or I find it so adorable that you think this way or that you act this way. Or, you know, I just realized that I wanted to bake some cookies and I thought about doing it, but then I realized you're just such a much better baker than I am. And I would love it if you would bake some cookies this weekend because I would bake subpar cookies, but you would make the best. Stuff like that, where you just
Yeah.
share a compliment. Um, but along with that is also being willing to kind of once again use that skill number two, go on a walk, use that space to actually say, here are the hard things. Because when we expose the hard things, we find the resolution, and that actually creates a positive marker on our relationship map. Because we just talk through a hard thing, and we put a little stake in the ground and said, "This matters," right?
Yeah.
So maybe it's that I'm saying, "Hey, hun, I know, for a while, uh, things have just been a little weird between us, and we just haven't been intimate for a while. But it really hurts me that I'm just not, that it seems like I'm not a priority to you and you're always focused on something else. Can we find a way to make that a priority between us?" Right. And so then that conversation turns into, what do we do? Do we put it on the calendar? Do we
Right.
schedule this time? Do we make it it's every Sunday and Wednesday, or whatever it is that we do.
Right.
Yeah. There's a funny song by Flight of the Conchords about that called Business Time, where they sing about this, and the guy says, "Tonight we're gonna make love." You know how I know? Because it's Wednesday.
That's good. That's
It's
great.
a great line, but it's so real because that's marriage, right? And this
Yeah.
is the thing, by the way, if you're young and you just got married and you're trying to figure out how does that intimacy time work and what are your expectations, and maybe you talked about it before you were married, maybe you didn't, maybe maybe one of you thought it was going to be every day and the other one thought it was going to be every Friday,
Right.
and and now you're in that tension of, we haven't figured this out yet. Just know that it's real. That's a real thing, guys, and the tension is real. And guys like Mike and I, who have been married for a long time, we still have to work through and negotiate this with our spouses. It's not like it's just an automatic, but over
Hmm.
time, what you get to is you start to know each other's rhythms, and you start to know, hey, this is what's comfortable and this is what works. So that actually has led to, there's a really fascinating statistic. Do you know who's having the best sex in America today?
I
I mean, right now. I don't mean today. I mean, like,
right, right.
in general, right?
I think I saw the headline on this article, but I don't remember it. Go ahead.
Yeah. So it's people who have been married to the same person and have only had sex with that person for 20 or more years.
I would agree.
Yeah.
I
So
that and
what
that's
that
fun.
means is,
It's funny that you say that because that's one of the things that we've noticed, and if it's something that we could tell another generation is that yeah, when you are committed to one another, working through these things, that your sex life actually does get better. I was kind of worried, like okay, bodies are changing, life is changing, and stuff like this. We don't look like we were in our 20s, and
No.
yet, what's that? Yeah, yeah, no, we
Yeah,
don't.
I said, I don't know. No, we don't look
No,
the same.
no,
Yeah.
nope, we don't. But I remember I had Brad Snyder on before because one of the challenges I think that I know for me I struggled with was if you're going to learn something, you go to school and you learn it. You know, so how do you learn about having sex and having great sex and doing different things? Well, there's this other P word that is out there that well, that's certainly showing us stuff, right? Well, you might learn
That's
something,
all
but a
fake.
whole lot. Yeah, exactly. It's fake. It's not real, and it
Yeah.
leads you down a different path. And so, I love what Brad had said. When you're in that place, part of the joy and the beauty of being married to one spouse for your whole life is that you have an opportunity to really explore one another and get to know one another. Song of Songs, Song of Solomon in the Bible is a really good roadmap. A little bit of that just the excitement. And guess what? You can be in your 50s. Some of the younger people are gonna be like, "Don't talk about this," but
No.
it like in many ways you kind of have to relearn yourselves as you go through things and as bodies change you have to relearn it, but it can be a beautiful intimate thing that actually makes your sex life so much better than what you came from before. And that was something I remember people trying to tell me something about it, but now starting to experience that reality and hearing other people like what you just said, um I am not surprised that the best sex being had by married people to one spouse over 20 years is.
Yeah. Yeah. Which and that just says then if you're a young person, you're maybe you're in your 3, 4, or 5, and you think the best is behind us, it's not.
Hmm.
The best is ahead. And I think that it comes down to you just mentioned Song of Solomon. It really comes down to what that says. I am my beloved's and my beloved is mine.
Yeah.
When you get to that point where you have become just so consistent with each other, you know each other's bodies so well that you say, I know every curve, I know every inch. This person belongs to me, and I belong to them. Then that allows you to just really be intimate, and
Hmm.
that intimacy is what makes it good. It's not about
Yeah.
the right moves or the right activity or the right whatever. That's not what
Yep.
it's about. It's about knowing each other and knowing what pleases each other and being able to give that to each other in this deep intimacy of just surrender. I'm surrendering to this other person. So yeah, and like you said, things change, but you explore those changes together, you grow together, and you start to say, I just could never imagine anybody else being this for me
Yeah.
because this is the only person for me. This is my
Right.
one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. The best thing another person could give me is what I already have.
Right. Right. And this, by the way, this is part of that relationship map thing, right?
Yeah. I wrote
Because
that down.
your sex life, your intimacy is part of the relationship map that you create together, where you know how to approach each other, you know how to enjoy each other, and you know what it feels like afterwards, and you make positive memories about and even
Hmm.
have times where you go back and, like I said, sharing positive memories, even looking back and saying, what do you think was the best time we ever? And you kind
Yeah.
of go, well, that anniversary trip was really exciting, but actually, I think it was last Tuesday.
Right.
You know, and there's nothing about it that was remarkable other than just that it seems fresh, right? So creating this relationship map
Yeah.
where you know each other well and you know what your relationship is and you see it as a we rather than a you and me. That's the skill. It's kind of a big skill. It's kind of abstract, but in the day-to-day living, like I said, if you're asking each other, if you're first of all just giving each other that compliment, um, and then if you're asking each other the hard questions, hey, what's something I could be doing better? And then another thing you can be doing too is asking, how can I be more helpful to you tomorrow? What can I do to
Yeah.
help? I love asking that question to my wife sometimes when she's feeling a lot of emotion about something. I'll just ask the question, how can I help? And sometimes she'll say, just listen. Okay. And sometimes she'll say, well, could you do this? Sure. But what I'm really doing is I'm reassuring her that no matter how much she's feeling something, um, her husband's going to help her through it.
Yeah.
And so she's not on her own facing this challenge, whatever it is. But even if it's not a challenge, even if it's just simply like, hey, how can I help you tomorrow? Hey, could you unload the dishwasher? Yeah, yeah, absolutely, no problem, got it.
I would say
But
to
just offering to partner together.
I would say to Miss from time to time, and I still try to do this from time to time, but um, how can I love you today? Which we would kind of define of, what would it look like for me to love you today? Um, and yeah, I'm not talking about sex. I'm talking about what would it look like and feel like to be loved by me for where you're at right now. And that was always, I've learned some things in that question.
Yeah,
She definitely taught me some things about what makes us we. And I before we go on to the digital piece, I just want to say this. You said it, and I, if you're putting a, maybe I retitle number three this way, but the we-ness of our relationship, the we rather than a you and me, big difference. Rather than the two become one. That's a we. How do you do that through a relationship map? Really considering, things like love languages and your strengths, the memories, the dreaming forward, compliments, exposing the hard times, asking to hard questions. That idea of can we find a way, and like you said, sex. I love what you said. Intimacy is what makes it good. The knowing of one another in the deepest ways, the most personal ways, the most beneficial ways. That's what makes it great, not the moves and all that stuff. Yeah, that's awesome.
yeah,
So thank you for that. So there's your three. We, rather than you and me, take a walk, repair, some skills for you to think about if you've never heard it, and some ways to maybe move forward. Last thing that I want to just cover, we talked just a bit about one of the challenges to relationship. I like to say relationship comes from shared experiences. If you're struggling right now in your relationship, whether it's a spouse or a kid or a friend, whatever, ask yourself, tell me, what has been the quality of those shared experiences and what is the frequency of the positive ones versus the negative, interactions. And when we were talking about that, though, you kind of brought up the challenge that exists in our digital world, and maybe just a
yeah,
couple thoughts on this for married couples before we call it a day.
yeah. Well, one of the things that when I talk with married couples in my office and I'm asking them about what does your day look like, so many of them will say, well, we go to work, we come home, and then, we'll put a show on the TV or whatever, but we'll sit on the couch and we'll each be looking at our own phone. And it's kind of, I mean, there's memes about this, right?
Yeah,
But
there
it's
are.
it's real. They're memes because it's real.
Right.
We'll sit there and we'll look at our phones, and then we'll make some dinner, and then we'll play on our phones some more. And when I ask, well, what are you doing on your phone? I don't know, scrolling through dumb reels, playing a game, just scrolling through social media or whatever. And I want to be clear. I'm super guilty of this. Like this convicts me to even talk about it because I know how often I find myself looking at a day and going, man, I just spent 2 hours looking at the screen while my wife and my kid were in the room with me, and I didn't
Yeah.
even connect with them at all. And I regret it. And then I feel powerless to make a change, right? It's that self control. What do I do to fix that situation? Um, but I think we've got to address that because, I saw a statistic not so long ago that kind of startled me. What they used to say um, is that the number one thing that couples fought about and the number one thing that caused divorce was finance,
Yeah.
money conversations, money arguments, money disagreements. But there was a statistic recently that said that the number one thing now is our use of digital media, social media, phones, and so on. Just think for a second about how powerful that is. I mean, there's a book from the 1920s called How to Win Friends and Influence People. Um, you know,
I've seen it. Yeah.
um, yeah, by a guy named Dale Carnegie. And he has a chapter in that book about marriage. Because what he says is, hey, if you don't have a solid marriage, you're not going to be able to win friends and influence people because people are going to look at your life and say, hey, you got issues. And so he goes through a chapter about how to have a solid marriage. And it's fantastic. He's got fantastic advice. It's 100 years old, but you got to read it. Here's the thing. In that chapter, he talks about money as the number one thing that couples fight about and how to deal with your money so that you don't fight about it.
Mm.
So for nearly 100 years, this was a common thing, that money was the thing that was a problem for couples. And in the last 10 years, suddenly this new technology has appeared on the scene and has taken over our marriages.
Wow.
How powerful that really is, right? Think about that. So what I hope to start with is just that if you're this couple who's listening to this, that you would number one recognize that yeah, this is an issue, but number two, that you would also recognize that you're normal. This is a thing that's happening to everybody. Okay, so you're not a weirdo, you're not a freak, and you're not broken. And this isn't something that's like, wow, I'm really addicted to this and nobody else is. No, this is our whole society, guys.
Yeah.
So what do you do about it? Like, what do you as a married couple or as a family do about it? And I think that it sounds so simple, hard to practice, but you got to put in some boundaries in your home, right? And so it might be a thing like, hey, at 7 o'clock at night, we plug our phones in, next to the refrigerator, and we stick them in a little caddy that we put for our phone. There's our charging station, all that stuff. And they go on silent mode and they go in there and we just don't even look at them. Or, I mean, obviously, you got to figure out what works for you as a family, what makes the most sense. But
Hmm.
maybe it's that you've got to go into your own phone. There's all kinds of built-in structure now. In Android, it's digital well-being, and iPhones, it's screen time. You can go in and you can tell it that after a certain time of the day, you just don't want connectivity at all. You just can't access the internet. Or you can tell it, hey, go to black and white at a certain point, so that now the screen is less interesting to look at.
That's
Or
interesting.
yeah, you can tell it to limit how much time you spend on an app. Say, I get 15 minutes a day on, social media apps. And once I hit the 15 minutes, the phone says you can't use them anymore. Um, Obviously, can I always just go in and do that? Sure. But if I can just make it a little bit harder for me to,
Yep.
just giving myself that little bit of incentive to stop. And then gamify. I love the idea of gamifying your tech use because the whole reason these things do this is because the people who designed them applied game theory to them. And game theory is the idea of what is it that keeps a person coming back to keep tapping again and again and again.
Hmm.
And they know exactly what it is. And that's why certain apps pop up a notification at a certain time every day. That's why when you go into certain things, sometimes you go to your Facebook and you're like, well, gee, I don't have any notifications. Nobody seems to be interested in talking to me. And then 15 minutes later, you open it and there's 27 notifications. You know what? Those notifications were coming in all along, but Facebook gave them to you all at once because it knows that as soon as it does that, it makes you want to come back.
Hmm.
It's you get sucked back in. So the whole point is that if you can hack your own system, right, and say, all right, can I reward myself for not using this? Right? If I set up my digital well-being to say I want to limit myself to an hour a day on my phone, and for every day that I do that, I've got a calendar on the wall and I'm going to put a star sticker on the calendar. And at the end of that week, if I did that, I'm going to go to Culver's. I'm going to buy myself a custard. And I'm going to enjoy it. I'm just going to enjoy it. And I'm
Hmm.
going to sit at the Culver's without my phone and I'm going to watch people and all those other people and count how many of them are sitting and looking at their phones and don't even know that I'm looking at them because I'm
Right.
I'm the only weirdo who's not looking at his phone.
Right.
Um, but do stuff like that so that it actually trains my brain to think differently about my tech use. I know a guy who does these uh, regular tech fasts. So what he does is like he has an hour a day that is just like all of it, like no computer, no phone, nothing. And then he has a day a week, which is like usually I think he says it's Friday, where he just the whole day on Friday, never even opens a computer, never opens his phone. He goes with a notebook. He goes out for hikes. He does stuff outside, gets stuff done around the house, whatever, but he just doesn't even touch it. And then 1 week a month. So he has a week that he assigns, plans it out on a calendar that is his tech free week.
Wow.
And he maybe goes on vacation with the family and they just leave their phones behind or whatever. They buy a flip phone. So they have a phone for emergencies. They carry it with them, with a phone card. But whatever works for you, if there's a system you can come up with that can actually help you hack your own system,
Mm-hmm.
it's worth it. It's worth doing.
Yeah. So good. Yeah, and you gave us a whole bunch of ideas. I'm writing down notes. I don't know how many of you are listening in cars or at home or whatnot that you can actually just take some notes. But these last two with Brandon have been fantastic for doing that. So thanks for all of the notes. If I get a chance to type them up,
Yeah.
I'll try to make them available. But man, this is so good. Any closing thoughts? Anything that you'd want to say to married couples to close?
Um, Actually, I think I would like you to tell that story you told to me when we got on the call before we started
Oh,
recording, if you would.
yeah. So yeah, this is great. My wife's grandmother is 98 years old, and it's funny because every time we go in, she told God last year, "I don't want to celebrate another birthday here." And then she was mad on her birthday. She's like, "I told God I don't want it. What I don't want this." People bringing in gifts and stuff like that. Well, she made it to 98, and she's still like her mind is there. She was telling us stories about growing up and um, uh, some of them we've heard, any number of times before, but like every time she tells them, like if you're listening, you'll get some additional details that you're like, oh, I didn't know that. And it's just really cool. As we were leaving, she asked us how long we were married. And, we shared that. And then she just looked at us and she said, and this wasn't verbatim because we can't exactly remember, but there was a way that she looked at both of us and she said it to both of us. Don't you quit on each other. Don't, Melissa, don't look out someplace else. Mike, don't look someplace else. Michael and Missy, and the way that she said that, um, don't look someplace else. Um, I mean, I'm 51. I mean, I would expect my parents to say something like that in their 70s, but when your 98-year-old grandmother looks at you and she can't do anything. That's one of the things she mourns is she can't do stuff. And we reminded her, but showing gratitude to people is actually one of the greatest gifts that you can do. And so if you've got the mind and ability to do that, then keep showing gratitude because you're doing way more than you realize. But for her to then just share that with us, just as an encouragement, I mean, like, try not to tear up, but that was powerful for both of us. And I can't every marriage is going to have temptations that were going to come against you. For men and women, husbands and wives, they may be different, but they can be no less deadly, whether it's money, spending, sex, status, work, depression, things that we tend to get ourselves addicted to. There's something coming that will always distract us away from God and away from our most significant relationship with our spouse. And I'm so grateful for that she had that moment with us because it didn't just feel like us showing up and trying to be nice to grandma and spending a little bit of time. She actually delivered something. God delivered through her something to us that I can't help but think will be the answer to a temptation that will come in our 50s and our 60s when Satan is still trying to keep us from getting to what my mom and dad celebrated at 50. So yeah, what awesome advice from a 98-year old woman who lost her husband, her lover, a number of years ago, to be able to say that to us, and we would say that to you, and hold us all accountable to it. Um, don't look elsewhere. Don't look elsewhere.
Yeah.
Don't quit on each other.
Amen. Couldn't have said it better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. I'm gonna go blow my nose and dry my eyes, but
All right.
that is that is what we've got for today. And I told you when we do these great questions, great conversations, it oftentimes starts as a question. But I love that so many of the people who join us. Thank you, Brandon, for being authentic, vulnerable, transparent. These are what I think make the conversation powerful. It is a glimpse of intimacy that we can have as brothers, sisters, in talking today about the institution of marriage that really in our country needs as much help as it can possibly get, and especially for us in the church who are holding on to Jesus Christ. Take another step, take another step, take another step. So, hey, everybody. Thank you, Brandon, for joining us. This has been great. Last 2 weeks.
Welcome.
Thank you so much. And for all of you who are listening, if you've got ideas, topics that you'd like to have us question, I'll leave Brandon's contact information in our YouTube show notes as well, if you'd like to be able to reach out to him on anything that he had talked a little bit about. But if you've got topics, feel free to email me. My contact information will be in the notes as well. And until next time, this is Great Questions, Great Conversations, a podcast of St. Paul's Lutheran in the Bridge in Muskego, Wisconsin. I'm the host, Mike Westendorf, and we will see you again next time.